So I'm going to run through some stuff around, which is a very common thing, I think, that's come up in our group of women who are dating. And Louise is here to kind of tell us a bit more about it. And she's just been telling me, that she was on the phone to a guy having a phone date, which I very much recommend you do. Is have phone dates instead of coffee dates, just so you don't waste your time with the wrong men. And a thing that seems to come up, I think, for men a lot, as a bit of a sort of complaint from women, is that men tend to, and I think it's actually related to anxiety a lot of the time with men on the phone, where they just get a kind of verbal diarrhea about really boring stuff. So they go into a monologue, either about work or about, you know, something that happened, that's actually quite dull. Maybe about they've got a bad knee, I think was one. I think someone was saying about that. And they just go on and on and on, and you can't kind of get a word in. And then, by the time you can get a word in, you're just like, oh my God, I just want to get off the phone. I'm bored out of my mind. But actually, we can do some redirecting, and we can also do a little bit of work actually also around sort of getting into our feminine energy before a phone call. And then I came up with 3 ways to kind of redirect a conversation actually, which might be helpful. So, and I made a cool little slideshow about it. So I'm gonna just kind of share my screen actually and just sort of run through it. And then obviously it'll be a video, so you can kind of stop and start it and re-look at it. And then you and I can kind of have a little bit of a chat after that, if you're up for it, just about, any questions you've got, or like, whatever, really, how you would apply that, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get into it. Can you see that okay?
Not yet. It just says has started screen sharing. Yeah. Okay.
Lovely. Okay, so I wanted to kind of focus a bit on this with, this idea of balancing feminine energy with assertiveness, as well, because I think often one of the misconceptions women have about feminine energy is like we automatically think it means just being passive and actually just sitting back and listening to the monologue, right? So sometimes we kind of think that, and then I know that can really put women off sort of wanting to dive into their feminine energy because they have this misconception about it. And so, my view on feminine energy is that it's not passive. We can be assertive, but we can do that in a warm way. We can do that in a feminine way. So for me, it's kind of really about mastering the art of redirecting conversation while maintaining your feminine energy, learning some practical techniques to kind of create deeper connections on dates through warmth, curiosity, and authentic engagement, which for me, those are kind of 3 big ingredients of our feminine energy, as opposed to masculine, which can be a little bit more on the surface, a bit more logical, a bit more kind of like, let's just get the job done. I've got sort of a set of interview questions in a way that I want to get ticked as boxes, right? So that's a very masculine approach, actually, to that women often use, which I think can really kind of kill the warmth, and it can kill the authenticity because it's not very spontaneous and it's quite fixed, and and it can also be a way that women sort of turn men off and turn a conversation the wrong way. So, and then if we move on from that a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, I was thinking that there are ultimately, in my view, kind of just 3 helpful ways to redirect a conversation, and I'm going to talk them through. So one is a kind of a soft redirect, then we've got the emotional connection, and then the playful interruption. So these are just kind of 3 different ways that I thought might be quite nice. And so, I'm just imagining a bit of a role play scenario, really. So we'll just call the guy Michael. I didn't know his name, but what that could look like would be, I suppose, kind of just waiting for. He might not stop if it's a monologue, but usually there's a bit of a lull, or there might be a kind of a couple of seconds where there's a bit of a gap or something where you can kind of gently interrupt, and sort of say, that sounds like challenging work. What do you enjoy doing when you're not revolutionizing software from imagining? He's sort of monologue, right? So that's one way that we can kind of go in and actually, I've done this a lot in sales training and in coaching. We have to do this with our clients. Often you've probably noticed actually in our coaching group, sometimes I'll do a sort of redirect or an interrupt with people who are like just on one and just going off on a tangent and are really kind of going down a rabbit hole. And it's like, hang on, because sometimes it's very negative and it can start to really drag the group down. So there's a need to sort of say, hang on a minute, I'm just going to stop you. And it's not to say what you're saying isn't important, but like, let's get into solution focus, right? And I think when we're thinking about redirecting with our feminine energy, it's very solution focused, because I think, again, often masculine energy is very problem focused. It's very much like, oh, here's a problem, how can I fix it? Right. And we often do that as women. This is a key way that women, I think, kill connection on dates and, flip into that masculine space, which we're very much in, right? As modern women, we're in it in the workplace, we're in it even in our dating. How can I fix this? How can I find the person? How can I, we're not tapping into that kind of aspect of ourselves that is a little bit more mystical, magical, and kind of magnetic. So there you go, 3 M's for you. So does that kind of make sense? Does that feel doable?
Yeah, I suppose it's, you're drawing someone towards you rather than, as you say, mentally going through like, how do I get this question answered? How do I find out this? That's not allowing for the just kind of spontaneity of any given moment.
Yeah, exactly. So then we've got number 2 is the emotional connection. So again, kind of coming with a positive aspect, waiting for a little break or a lull or interrupting even. I think you can interrupt someone if you're going to say something nice, actually, and it's worth bearing in mind that often for the man, he might just be on a bit of a runaway train and he might feel sort of unable to stop talking, because then he's worried about, like, if I stop, what's she going to say? Is anyone going to say anything? I've got, that's quite a male thing, to sort of want to take control of the call, fill the space, not being able to sit with the silence. So I think we can interrupt people, and even though the interruption might feel a bit rude on your part because of the act of interrupting, if you're going to say something nice and you're then asking them a follow-up question, most men will be fine about it and actually maybe relieved that you're kind of interjecting some of that femininity right into the space. Yeah, does that make sense? So it's kind of thinking about sharing something that you like about what he's doing, as opposed to focusing on how boring it is what he's saying, because we've got to find something genuinely that we like about the person. And of course there will be times when it is literally so boring and such a monologue that you want to get off the phone, and sometimes we need to get off the phone. I'm not saying we should stay there and be sort of like vomited upon endlessly by some boring guy, but I think actually what's really helpful, and this sometimes is a mindset shift, is to really train our brains to really dive in and look for what's good about this, and what can I genuinely take away about this person's character, or what their intention is behind what they're doing here, right? As opposed to kind of just being so, often we're so hard, we're so judgmental, we're so quick, aren't we, to be like, no, boring, bye, next, and we're not necessarily giving the man a chance, because we're making that call too early, and we're not kind of just being in that softer space, in that more empathetic place of sort of saying, well, maybe he's just really nervous and he's trying to impress me and he's not doing it very well, but his intention is good, right? And he's trying to bring something. So
it's kind of like, thanks for honesty, thanks for telling me more. Actually, what I'd like to hear about as well as work is a bit more about this. Or
Exactly. So it's kind of another redirect, but it's creating some more of an emotional connection while you're doing that. I'd love to know more about you beyond your amazing skills in work, but it's sort of that appreciation. I love how enthusiastic you are about your work. So that's nice. And then the playful interruption, which, is just a different energy. But I think, again, playfulness is such a great thing that we can bring in terms of feminine energy. It's a very feminine trait, is to sort of call them out a little bit in a fun way, in a light way. Time out for a second, tech genius, tell me something that made you happy this week that had nothing to do with coding, or nothing to do with your work. And so it's a kind of a way of also being a little bit assertive and kind of like setting a gentle boundary is to sort of say enough now. Like, I don't actually want to hear any more of this, but like,
What I thought I could have said actually is, okay, that would all be great if we were in a job interview. We're not, unless maybe it's a job interview for boyfriend, and then just like switch to something else, or just kind of to say, you don't have to impress me in this way where you give me your whole work history, but thing. But
yeah, yeah, you can go in a bit and kind of tease them, you know, and turn it into like a playful little bit of banter. I mean, I'm wary of banter when it's too blokey, but I think in this sort of way we can use there is feminine type of banter where it's playful, right? And we kind of call them out and we sort of show off our confidence a little bit and our sort of like sense of, mate, you're going to kind of have to switch this up to keep you know what I mean? Like, this is
right,
boring, but without seriously kind of destroying a guy's self-esteem, right?
yeah,
In the mix. Does that make sense? So
yeah, for redirection. I understand what you're saying.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So these were some things that I sort of thought were great key elements of a successful redirection, right? So we're kind of going in here, it's getting a bit scientific. But these were just, again, really focusing in on that feminine energy piece, right? Being warm. So tone is such a big piece of this. Because like I said a minute ago, I think we can afford to interrupt if we bring that warm tone, and tone of voice and the energy and the emotion behind what we're saying is so key. Um, I'm a big fan of the playful angle. Like, that's kind of what I've used a lot in my dating and in my relationship, and I because I think it shows confidence, it shows lots of things. It's nice to be a little bit sassy. I think that's kind of sexy for men. They like that. There's a little bit of challenge in there, but it's nicely done. You know, it's kind of it's not competitive, and we want to be careful of not tipping over into kind of competition, because I think competition is one of the biggest killers of where successful women and kill their dates. Like, and particularly if we are quite smart and we are successful and we are career driven, we often kill with competition instead of connection, right? So honoring his contribution, we've kind of touched on that a little bit, but yeah, just that acknowledgement before redirecting, staying authentic, being honest about kind of wanting to know him better, really, while remaining kind and gentle. You know, there's that kind of angle, and then leading with curiosity, using questions that invite him to share more meaningful aspects of himself. But I think we have to be mindful, like the feminine aspects that we bring through these examples of what feminine energy looks like, right? What are the traits of feminine energy that we can kind of bring and draw on? And I think the point of it is that we're creating safety for the man to actually put down the work stuff and the achievement stuff and the trying
Right.
stuff, right? This is the point of it. This is the why of it, that we create this emotional space, we create this emotional safety so that the man can then kind of like let out some of those, reveal some of those more meaningful aspects and get vulnerable himself. And this is really the key thing that we need to be learning. If we can
Beginning of
practice,
emotional connection.
what's that, sorry?
Beginning of emotional connection between you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And all of this is a great way of using emotional connection instead of kind of flirting and sexuality. I mean, this is a way of flirting that's very feminine and emotionally driven instead of being sexually kind of physically driven, right? Which we want to stay away from, really, because this is what creates that kind of like desire in a man to want to know more. It's unusual for him. It's something he doesn't generally get from his other, like from male friends. Men don't connect in this way, and often female friends are not going to necessarily connect with him in this way, maybe. But yeah, so I think it's really a great way of kind of developing and building that emotional connection. And you'll be surprised, like, sometimes when you bring this, a man can really shift out of that stuff and suddenly become really interesting, and there can then suddenly become it can create a lot of chemistry, actually. And so this is also really great for women who are a little bit more on the avoidant side or on the fearful side of connection, right? It's like you've got to lead and go there yourself, and just be a bit brave about going into that space yourself, because sometimes there's a block there for you around I don't like what this person's doing. I'm just going to get off the phone. I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to kind of take my space. I don't want to take up my space because I'm scared of conflict, or I'm scared of connection myself, right? So this is the thing, isn't it? We've got to really learn to like feel the fear and do it anyway, and step into this space and just trust that we are women. We are full of feminine energy. It's in us. We're born with it. It's, you know, this isn't something you're necessarily having to learn from scratch. It's something that often just gets compartmentalized over the years for various reasons, you know, a mixture.
Yeah, you're going back to something rather than learning it from scratch.
Yeah, I think that's helpful to know that, because you know you can then start kind of trying to reach in for it, as opposed to kind of in your mind sort of going, what is it again? I can't remember. It's in you. It's just, it's quite simple really, right? When we think about it in these kind of terms. So, and these were just a couple of questions. I know I've given you some other resources as well, but these were just like some that came up for me kind of, that are a little bit more specific to a phone date. So questions to kind of explore his passions, time and joy, what activity makes you lose track of time because you enjoy it so much, which I think is nice. Daily highlights, what part of your day do you typically look forward to the most? Energy sources, when was the last time you felt completely energized by something you were doing? I think that's a really lovely question. And then freedom choices, if you had a free day with no obligations, how would you spend it? What would you do? So I think these are some really nice questions that, again, are going to create that emotional home, that emotional space. So these are fantastic ways to invite a man in, yeah, to get him to open up and start feeling that emotional connection with you. And then you're going to get some really interesting stuff back, right? And if you get nothing back, that's it. That's great information. You know what I mean? It's like, because I think what we need to learn to do as women is really learn to show up fully and then make a decision about men. And I think often what's happening actually for most women is that we're not showing up fully. And then we're just sort of assuming that, well, we're sort of saying, well, the man isn't showing up fully either. So this is a no, and it's another no, and it's so exhausting. And this is why we spend so many months dating, right? This is kind of a really good shortcut hacking ways to do dating, right? Because we're gonna see who he is. Like, can he exist in that emotional space with me, or is he gonna have a meltdown and maybe he'll get off the phone, you know? But that's fine. Like, that's what we want. We want to repel men as quickly as possible if they're not right for us, right? That's ultimately the aim. So these were just a couple of other questions, like to understand his values, you know, what quality do you really appreciate in people you keep close? What's something you stand for that's really important? Tell me about someone who's had a significant impact positively. And then meaningful moments is nice. I think, what's a small act of kindness you witnessed recently that stuck with you? So again, these are all quite emotional questions and about values and personal principles, which I think are, you know, again, gonna, I know one of your questions was like, how can I cut through some of this and you know, like really learn a bit about who this person is on this phone call. I don't want to have 5 phone calls necessarily. I want to kind of like, you know, get through some stuff.
Someone,
Yeah. So and then just to kind of deepen a little bit, going into kind of inviting emotional vulnerability, if we're thinking about some other questions again, like emotional responses, I think these are great. What's something that moved you recently? Film, a story, and experience. Personal pride. When was the last time you felt proud of yourself? You know, if someone finds that really hard, like, you're going to start to see somebody's self-esteem a little bit, or if there is any kind of like narcissism or personality disorder or anything, you know, some of these deeper questions can really trigger some of those things to be shown, right? It's going to show you some, even maybe some red flags if someone gets angry about these types of questions, or if they can't answer them, you know, if they then kind of start doing a monologue again over the top of you, right? So I think it's important that we do interject and we do try and bring them into this space, so that we can kind of get some of the answers and get some of the reality of who the person is.
And I also feel like it's important that I can answer them for myself first, like,
yeah,
be able to get to that point myself.
Absolutely.
Before I ask these.
That's a great point. So I would suggest, like, go through this. I'll send you the recording, but you know, go through it and not do some journaling like around these questions, and that's going to give you a bit more to sort of stack on, right? I think growth area questions are great as well. Like, what's something you're working on improving about yourself right now? And then challenges, what challenge taught you something valuable about yourself? So I think that's also um, a really nice one, really. So and then I wanted to talk just for a minute about kind of creating shared experiences. And we've got some more stuff here about kind of common interests. Um, so again, kind of deeper questions, follow-up questions to answers that they give you. Ideal time together, what would be a perfect day together, like, or a date is a nice idea. Like if they say something like, oh, Formula One and then the pub, something. Like some women love that, but like for me, I'd just be like, oh, don't think we're you know what I mean? Like, and it's not to discount someone because they like that, but if it also if a man thinks that that's a great date idea for a woman, you kind of think,
Got some work to do here.
need too much work there. I don't know. Memorable places is nice. Future adventures is always nice as well. So just a couple of other kind of prompty things really for you to ask. But again, good to do some journaling around these and maybe get some clarity around these yourself. And then asking questions with feminine energy. So we've got we've touched on tone a little bit, but warm and interested, convey genuine care about his responses. So listening, active listening, asking follow-up questions to his answers. And then also allowing comfortable silence, which is really a skill. And I know a lot of women find that hard, and men do. Some of that monologue is filler, isn't it? It's kind of anxiety-driven filler. And women do it as well. They just talk and talk and talk, will fill the space. And you're just just stop, allow sometimes uncomfortable silence, I think, as well.
Yeah, it's not allowing you both to sort of go to that deeper level. And I did it once on a date, and then the next thing the guy said was something much more interesting and emotionally connected.
Yeah,
that sort of 3 or 4 minutes of us just sitting in silence.
exactly. And sometimes that's fine. And that's a big part of actually learning to receive. It's just sitting and receiving the silence between you and kind of tuning into how that feels, tuning into your body, tuning into noticing. If it says, well, I've put allow comfortable silence, it can be uncomfortable as well, so it's learning to sit with that kind of awkwardness and then listening receptively. I mean, I think so many of the single men that I coach complain about this and say that they often, lots and lots of men, most of them actually say that they often don't feel like women listen. They're kind of like in their head trying to think about the next question, or they're obviously sort of feeling bored by what they're talking about. They're not really feeling heard. So I think it's a big one for men if you can really just practice active listening, even if you're not necessarily interested in what they're saying. Sometimes there's lots of things underneath what they're saying, there's kind of meaning behind it. So I think it's really just a nice thing we can give somebody that we're on a date with is just being willing to kind of listen, and to some extent, like I said, obviously, we can interrupt. So, and then just finally, really some follow-up techniques to deepen connection, reflect what you've heard back. So this is how we actively listen, is we kind of then reflect back. So, oh, what I heard you say was this, is that correct? Or it sounds like freedom is really important to you. So that's very kind of affirming for a man, I think, to feel heard, to feel listened to feel like you're genuinely interested in who he is, not what he can provide. Because I think, again, for a lot of men, they get very triggered into really deep fear, and especially men who've been through messy divorces and have had difficult relationships in the past, who've perhaps been used by women or felt like they were used by women. And it does happen a lot. It's fascinating coaching men, because there's a lot of the complaints that men have are very similar to the ones that women have. We don't necessarily understand that that's what's going on. We just kind of think, oh, men are like this and women are like that, but it's not true. So and I think so, kind of asking natural follow-ups. What was it about that experience that impacted you so deeply? How did it make you feel? And then maybe sharing, connecting that to your experience. I can relate to that feeling. I felt similar when. That's a really lovely feminine energy way to create connection and to get a bit vulnerable yourself, to share a little bit back. And then appreciating his openness. Thank you for sharing that. It helps me understand you better. I really like it when you know, a man is brave enough to share openly with me, it makes me feel good, right? So anything like that, that's kind of a feeling statement. So really using that kind of feminine language, I feel, not I think, because often we just, you know, default to I think this, I think that. If we just switch that out to I feel this, I feel that, it can really make a difference in terms of kind of creating that emotional connection. And then, yeah, just kind of balancing that assertiveness really with feminine energy. So just a bit of a recap, kind of soft entry points, waiting for natural pauses, um, you know, using soft sounds. If you're actually on a date, you might put your hand on their arm or something, you know, just sort of leading with curiosity, not correction. So that's a big one, actually, is not correcting, not getting into like maternal mummy mode and kind of turning him into a naughty boy and like, oh, I don't like it when someone says this or does that, or oh, I think you're wrong, da 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 da. I mean,
teacher mode as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we can absolutely share our opinion. We can disagree. We can say, "Oh, I don't, you know, I don't necessarily agree with that. I see it this way." So that's fine. But correction is a different energy, right? When we're kind of telling somebody they're wrong or we're telling them about themselves. And I think often women are a bit guilty of that, especially if we've had kids and have, you know, single mums often do that. You know, they turn the man into their other child. You know, it's just menacing. They're like, oh my God, I'm like 50-year-old man. I really don't need this. It's something that, again, my male clients really complain about. So, and then framing redirection as interest. So that reminds me of something I'm curious about. I'd love to understand more about how you feel. I'm enjoying this and also wondering about X. Yes. So kind of, yeah, framing it as interest, really.
Expand rather than expert, sort of adding to what you're saying rather than
Yeah.
cutting it off.
Exactly. So that's that really. And then, you know, making sure you're creating that honor before shifting, acknowledge what he's shared, appreciate his perspective, and connect to something new. So kind of, you know, I think really as women, we want to be absolutely like, um, you know, we're always sort of talking about men leading, and yes, they should lead, but then we kind of still lead in our own way, using our feminine kind of power and our emotional energy in that sense, right? So we're very present, and in a way that leads things in an emotional direction. So we want to be kind of, when we talk about leading as women, because we both have to lead, you know, the man sort of leads in terms of maybe driving things forward, but as a woman we can also lead the emotional connection. We can direct things away from sexuality into emotional, and also kind of slow things down if we need to. You know, redirection is a great tool, feminine tool, to kind of have us in that really empowered place, actually, where we're getting the information we need. We're leading the whole connection into a much more authentic space, actually, a much more kind of slightly emotionally vulnerable space. Not overly so though, but just getting to know the real person and offering up who we really are. You know, not playing games, not kind of being defensive, competitive, batting back, all that sort of stuff, which is quite masculine.
Yeah. And the interesting thing I noticed about that is this emphasis on you lead with energy rather than words.
Yes.
It's about the script of what am I going to say to
Yes.
this or get the knowledge. It's everything. It's body language. It's your breathing. It's how fast or slow you're talking. It's
Yeah.
just being a different presence in the room.
Absolutely. So it's not always what you say, also how you say it, you know, tone of voice. But some of this I wanted to give you some tangible questions to ask, and some things, you know, that are concrete, that are like you can grip onto and be like, okay, those are great feminine energy questions that I can kind of, you know, not necessarily memorize, but I think when you start reading them and if you do some journaling around them, you'll start to integrate that, and then you'll just naturally start being, you know, doing that more on your calls. So I hope that's helpful. I was just to do that because I know we're missing the wanted to kind of make sure that we covered this because it's actually really helpful for you, but also for the rest of the group, I think.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you so much. Loads to think about and absorb. Really helpful.
Good. All right. Well, I will post this in the group for you. And
Great.
Yeah. So, and let me know next week how it goes. All
I
right.
will. I have a call tonight and another one tomorrow, video call. So let's see what happens.
Fantastic. We'll do post in the group as well and let us know how it goes. All right.
Thanks so much. Have a wonderful trip.
Good luck. Thank you. See you next week. Bye
Take
bye.
care.